CEO with Lisa G. I'm the best-selling author of The Boss Weight Loss. I'm bringing you the top tips to be unstoppable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually pull up a chair with today's top experts in weight loss, mindset, and business. Learn our top tips to set you up for success so that you can have more energy, be fit and resilient, and feel unstoppable. Hey everyone, I'm so excited we're here today with Eric Zimmer, and I want to tell you a little bit about his story first, and then we'll jump into the content, because he has gone from stuck to unstoppable, going from at the age of 24, being homeless, struggling with drug addiction, even facing jail time. And since then, he's not only found a way to overcome those obstacles to create a life worth living. He works as a behavior coach and has helped hundreds of people reach their goals and face obstacles. And now he's a creator of the award-winning podcast, The One You Feed, which is based on the old parable about two wolves at battle within us. With over 300 episodes and 15 million downloads, he's been featured as a TEDx speaker, and including Mind, Body, Green, and all kinds of other stuff. So since you have been, hey, Eric.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. I just love the way that everybody always makes resolutions and they always want behavior change, and they don't always have the tools to get there. Go from where you've been to where you are right now. I'm so inspired, on fire. I want to hear what habit change tips that you have that can help people go from where they are to where they want to be.
Yeah, well, I think it's hard to offer sweeping generalizations, right? Because where everybody is different. If you're starting from, say, where I did as a heroin addict and homeless, then what you need is very different than you just haven't been working out for a couple months, obviously. But I think there are some things that are, let's take addiction out of it for a moment, and we can talk about addiction if you want. But let's set that aside, because that's a big problem of a different nature. But if you're trying to make changes in life, there's some basic ideas that underpin good habit change. And one of the biggest is that the harder something is to do, the more motivation you need to do it.
I love it.
It makes total sense, right? So the problem is that motivation tends to go up and down. Some days it's really high, some days it's really low. So the reason that so many of us fall off with resolutions or other habit changes is we start too big. It's the new year and we go, you know what? I haven't been working out in 6 months, but I'm going to start by running, 5 miles a day. And that's really hard to do if you haven't been working out. Or I'm going to go to the gym for an hour every day. If you haven't been doing that at all, that's pretty hard. So for the first few days, you can do it because you're really motivated. It's the new year. Everybody's in the spirit, lots of motivation. But about the 6th day of the month, 7th day of the month, it's kind of gray out. It's kind of cold out. And you're like, I don't know, right? And so your motivation is down. And going to the gym for an hour is hard, and so you don't do it. So one of the things that can be really helpful is to start smaller than you think you need to. Because if you take the opposite of what we just talked about, so the harder something is to do, the more motivation you have to have. Well, the reverse of that is true also. The easier it is, the less motivation you need. So if you pick something that's relatively easy to do and you do it, then two things happen. First thing that happens is the more you do that easy thing, the easier it gets, and so you can do more. So if you're going to the gym for 15 minutes, all of a sudden it's easy to go from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, from 20 minutes to 25 minutes. So the thing gets easier to do the more you do it. And then your motivation naturally goes up when you're successful. So you say, I'm going to go to the gym for 15 minutes, and you do it, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I need to go to the gym for more than 15 minutes, but you do it and you're successful. And you do it the next day and the next day and the next day. You start feeling better about yourself. And then when that really lousy day comes up 8 days later, it's a lot easier to get to the gym for 15 minutes because that doesn't feel as overwhelming is doing it for an hour. So starting small and then building really makes a ton of sense. And we could talk more about why that is, but that's one of the biggest principles is, start small and focus on consistency. It's if you can get a habit of exercising every day, that's the hard part. Then you can build how much exercise you do.
No, I agree with you completely on the baby steps and building that trust for yourself because once you have kept your word to yourself, then you're building that level of self trust that you can change it. And I know that you said that addiction was a whole nother ball of wax that we don't have to open right now. But I love the idea of creating behavior change and keeping your word to yourself and consistency and accountability. And I know that they used to say it takes 30 days to change behavior like addiction. And from the research that I've read, it takes a lot longer than that, right?
Yeah, nobody really knows. I mean, it used to be, yeah, 21 days to start a habit or 30 days to build a habit. We just don't really know because all habits are different. What you're trying to build is different. Each person's individual capacity is different. So those numbers don't really mean anything. But what we do know is the more often you do something, the more likely you are to continue to do it. So both good and bad, right? So if it's a good habit, if you can string more and more time together, it becomes easier to do. And
Yeah.
thing with bad habits. So, the general idea is there, but I think trying to get hung up on specificity about exactly how many days, we just don't know.
Oh, I agree. But I would think that if you can build up that consistency game of just doing something that you decided to do for small baby steps over 2 or 3 months, and then pretty soon it becomes a lifestyle change where that's a
Yes.
part of your lifestyle that you look forward to and it's in your calendar like a boss. And do you have any other like tips on meditation or spiritual practice that can also help lead to behavior change?
Well, spiritual practice is a big part of my life. Meditation is a big part of my life. But those are more, I approach those things with a lot of people through the lens of let's apply behavior change principles to get you to do that stuff consistently. So it's not so much that meditation or spiritual principles helps you change behavior. What I almost look at it the other way, which is a lot of people say, I want a meditation practice, or I read all this spiritual stuff, but it doesn't seem to have any influence in my life. And so a lot of the work I do, it's a course we've done before and we'll be offering again this year called Spiritual Habits, where what we're trying to do is get you to habitually practice, you know, your spiritual practice. So meditation's part of it, but also how do you habitually be more mindful? How do you habitually let go in situations? How do we take spiritual practice and infuse it kind of into all parts of our lives?
That's the hard part for me. Like I can make myself have a morning habit and an evening habit, but the hard part I think becomes how does that become part of your life so that when you get triggered, you don't go to this reactionary mode? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, there's a few different ones. I mean, one of the things that I often recommend with my clients is there's some very simple apps out there. One of them on the iPhone is called Mind Jogger. And Mind Jogger, you can just go in and say, ping me X number of times within a certain window. So let's say you want to focus on your workday. You could say, randomly ping me, 7 times between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. And just randomly your phone will go off and it'll just display a little message. And so that can be your reminder, like, okay, what's happening right now? It can be a chance just to say, all right, let me check in. What am I doing? Where am I? How am I feeling?
I
And so,
love it.
because as you said, the biggest problem for a lot of us is we don't remember. So we remember. And so what we've done in the spiritual habits work is we will pick a spiritual principle for a period of time. So let's just take a spiritual principle like allow everything to be exactly the way it is, right? It's a real deep acceptance. And so that's the principle we'll focus on. And so people will get reminders regularly. When that comes up, they'll sort of just take a second and reflect and try and do that. So the combination of remembering to do it, being reminded to do it, and then having one specific principle that we work on for a period of time allows it to go really deep. Because what happens to a lot of us is we consume 35 spiritual ideas before we're done with breakfast. So which of those do we want to apply?
So
in our
choose
lives.
one. It's sort of like the baby steps for the
Yeah,
exercise becoming a regular habit, with spiritual practice and meditation becoming a regular habit and one that can last throughout the day. You pick one, like the art of allowing, and have
yeah.
yourself pinged on a regular basis, because art of allowing is so important. Because for me, I always feel like I want something and I work on meditating about it, but then you can't control stuff like that, can you?
No, no, you cannot. So it's yeah, I think you that was a really good tie together analogy there. Yeah, it's like starting small. It's sort of like, you pick a spiritual habit to work on in the same way that you pick a habit. So you're like, well, I'm going to exercise, right? The other thing that a lot of people do is they try and change everything at once. They're going to start exercising, they're going to start meditating, they're going to start writing in their journal, they're going to start eating good, they're going to start that creative project they've been meaning to do, right? They have all this stuff and then it just all gets lost. And so, yeah, same principle here. We're picking a spiritual principle to work with for a certain amount of time so we can really go deep with it, right? Because I think what happens for a lot of us, our lives, we skim along the surface. Like I said, we might read 5 articles before breakfast about spirituality, right? You go to a website like Tiny Buddha or Mind Body Green, you might read 10 articles before you're done. What out of that are you going to apply to your life? And so that's really the key is if we can take a couple key ideas and come back to them over and over and over and allow ourselves to go really deep in them and allow them, more importantly, to go really deep into us.
I love all of your work about the science and practice of behavior change and building habit change, and um, just immersing ourselves in one thing at a time. It's so helpful because I applaud everyone's effort when it's January or whenever you're driven and motivated, and you just say, I want to only eat kale and only exercise and meditate every day. There's no more alcohol in my life. I'm going to go to bed at 10 and wake up at 5 and just do everything right. And we can't change everything at once, can we?
Usually not. I mean, it depends. Some people can. I mean, there are times that like a wholesale change works, but by and large, for most of us, no, it doesn't work, right? Because what's happening, like I find wholesale changes like that work really well, like when some other big change is happening in life. Like, oh, I just lost my job. Okay, now I'm going to launch this whole new thing, right? Or I just moved to a new place. But most of us, what we've got is a pretty busy, full life,
Right.
and then we try and put so much into it. And so no, for most of us, we can't change everything at once. It just doesn't last. Now, that's again, to every rule there's an exception, and those are out there. Addiction is an exception, right? It doesn't really work for most people who have an addiction to take it slow. Like, well, let me just have a little bit less and one less drink today, right? Like, usually doesn't work if you're a full blown alcoholic. But so with behavior change, no, it's usually better to pick one thing, change it till it's a regular part of your life, and then add the next one in.
I love it. That's so helpful. Okay, so we talked about building a spiritual practice, and then meditation. Is that something that you basically add in a little bit every single day as well? Like,
Hmm.
how can you build a habit of meditation?
Yeah, well, I can just tell my own story. I was a on again, off again meditator for 20 plus years. I would read something. I'd read a book about Buddhism or a book about something, and it would talk about the importance of meditation. And I'd be like, all right, I got to start meditating again. And I'd start trying to meditate, and I'd do it for a day, a week, maybe a month, and then I'd fall off. And then inevitably, sooner or later, I'd pick up another book, or it would come back up. Oh, how important meditation is, and I'd do it again, a day or a week, a month. And in those days, and this was, you go back 20 years, the internet wasn't even really around. Most of the books I got, they would say, meditation, you should do 30 minutes a day. So I would sit down and meditate for 30 minutes a day, which was just too hard for me. Back to what we talked about in the very beginning. It
Yeah,
was like when I sat down to meditate, it's like the circus comes to town, right? It's not peaceful for me, at least
the
not
mind,
initially.
body,
Yeah.
the whole
Yeah.
mind going crazy, the monkey
Mind's
mind.
going crazy. Yeah, exactly. And so I'd sit there and I'd do it for a day, a two, a week. But again, it was really hard to do. So I needed to have sky high motivation. When that motivation faded, I'd quit. So about 6 years ago, a little bit longer than that now, I just decided, you know what? I'm going to meditate for 3 minutes a day, but I'm going to do it every single day. That's the rule, at least 3 minutes.
I love
So,
it. I love
yeah.
I love this theme that we've come to about how important consistency is rather than overdoing it. So that if you really want to change, then if you can commit to like 15 minutes a day of exercise, 3 minutes a day of meditation, or one message that you want to have of
Mhm.
spirituality throughout your day, that becomes your theme.
Yeah, and then you build. It's not like you have to stay there forever, right? So you might say, well, 3 minutes of meditation, that's not going to do a whole lot of good. And no, it's not going to do as much good as longer periods of meditation. But now I meditate 30 minutes about every day. I mean, I do meditate nearly every day. And most of the time I do it long, although I still give myself permission to do 5 minutes instead of 0 minutes, right? A little bit of something's better than a lot of nothing. Um, but yeah, that's how I did it. There were some other changes I made to how I approached meditation, but that was one of the big ones. One of the big ones was I started really small and I focused on consistency, because the hard part is to get to meditating every day. Once that's done, it's easy to go from 3 minutes to 4 minutes, 4 minutes to 5 minutes, 5 minutes to 7 minutes, 7 minutes to 10 minutes. It's the daily consistency that's hard. So we focus on that as the absolute key piece, right? And 3 minutes, it's hard to no matter how busy you are, it's hard to have an excuse like, I don't have 3 minutes, right? It's like I reflected on excuses at one point, and when I realized that, and again, not this is not political at all, but looking back at, when President Obama was in office and realized he exercised almost every day. And I went,
Right.
How can I say I don't have time? I mean, how could I have less time than the president of the United States? Like that
I
doesn't,
agree.
and so again, not that time challenges aren't real. They are real, but it's a prioritization thing. But that's why starting really small is easy, because if you're like, well, I don't have an hour to exercise every day. Great. Let's not start there. Let's start with 5 minutes of body weight exercises in your room. Let's start somewhere and build some consistency.
I
So
agree.
yeah, with meditation, that definitely worked. There were some other changes I made to the way I approached meditation that helped, but the big one was agreeing to start really small and building.
Okay, so what we want you guys to do is start really small and build from there to make habits stick with exercise, spirituality, meditation. And I agree that if the top leaders of our country, like the head of AOL and the head of Twitter and the former president of the United States, have time to have a morning routine that includes a spiritual practice and exercise, then you guys do too. Don't you agree on that?
I would tend to agree. I mean, again, a bit, I hate to always, tell people what they can and can't do in their lives. But
Right.
yes, I would tend to say, a question I heard once was, it's a really a question of what are we prioritizing, right? What do we think is important? And, what I've found is that having some fundamental things like exercise, meditation, eating well in my life actually gives me more energy and more power. I'm more effective, and it frees up, in the end, I end up getting more done, even though I've put those things in place, than I do when I don't. But again, if there are single mothers out there who are working two jobs and raising kids, and, I'm not going to, you know, I I can't say like, oh, they've got plenty of time. But I think the thing I do believe is that any of us, wherever we are, whatever our circumstances, we can make small improvements in our lives that make them better. Wherever we are, there are ways to get a little bit better, a little bit healthier, a little bit happier.
Well, your message just rings true to me so much because you're walking your walk and you've been there and you're talking the talk and you're not judging people, because we all have the same 24 hours in the day on the one hand. And on the other hand, I love the no judgment piece because we all have a different story. So I would love to finish with just elaborating a little bit more on your story and how
Mhm.
you've come so far from where you were at 24, because that impresses me, and just a little bit more behind the one you feed about the 2 wolves, because I love that story of the parable.
hmm Well, I'll tell the parable real quick, I guess, and then we'll go there. The parable is, a lot of people have heard it, but there's a grandfather who's talking with his grandson, and he says, "In life, there are two wolves inside of us. That are always at a battle. One is a good wolf that represents things like kindness and bravery and love, and the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear." And the grandson stops and thinks about it for a second, and he looks up at his grandfather and he says, "Well, grandfather, which one wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." So that's the parable. And I first heard that parable a long time ago when I was early in recovery from heroin addiction. And it totally resonated with me. You know, I often joke that I wasn't feeding the bad wolf anymore. He was kind of eating me at that point. But you know, my story of recovery is not unlike a lot of people's. I got into a 12-step program. I went to treatment, and for a period of time, that's what I did. My focus was on getting sober. You know, I gave all my attention to that. I didn't try, you know, I didn't immediately say like, all right, now I'm a little bit sober, so I'm also going to go back to college, and I'm also going to, I just really, really worked really hard on staying sober. And then that just kind of led, you know, once that happened, that led from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And a bunch of years later, I started this podcast. So, I mean, I did a lot of things in between there. But for me, um, you know, recovery was just really putting a lot of focus on that thing, making that the most important thing. The most important thing was to stay sober. And then I learned so much along the way doing that. I mean, I think those years in my 20s when I was in 12-step recovery really taught me a lot about living that I still reflect on today. But then, yeah, over a course of years, I was in the software startup business. I owned a solar energy company. I did a lot of things, and then it's been about 6 years ago. The podcast is 6 years old, and on January 1st, you know, I sort of,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I just sort of decided like it just sounded like something I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to talk with people about these ideas. And I kind of did it just starting to do it as an enjoyment slash I kind of felt like I needed it. Like it would be good for me to hear these ideas. My best friend was an audio engineer, and I thought, well, we could spend time together doing this fun project. And then, you know, 6 years later now, it's what I do for a living, and I do coaching work, and I run all these workshops. But it really started much more modestly than that, and that's another example of, as we talked about, this starting small. Like I just started the podcast because I wanted to do it. And I started, it wasn't this huge thing. It didn't have all these listeners, but then week after week after week after week of putting out an episode every Tuesday, you know, an episode has come out every Tuesday for 6 years. We just consistently put the work.
Commitment. I love your
Yeah.
consistency theme and your commitment theme. And I really love how you bring it back to one thing at a time. Because
Yeah.
for me, that having been an entrepreneur, I was inspired to do this podcast just based on all the stress to success that I've been through. It hasn't been easy just trying to build an email list and a social media platform. And I wake up and I start like, what am I doing? Like I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Am I doing any like income producing activity, or am I just like spinning? So
Yeah.
having a meditation practice and focusing on one thing is something that can really help me, I think, instead of trying to do it all at once, which is more my pattern.
Yep, totally. Well, being an entrepreneur these days, right, particularly an online entrepreneur, there is so many different ideas and approaches and ways to go about it. But I agree with you. I mean, what I did was, you know, my sort of most important that I focused on every week was making sure I put out a good podcast. That was the thing that I focused on. And then, so if that meant my social marketing efforts didn't go as well, if that meant I didn't do as much list building, if that meant like, but that was the thing I thought, well, that's the heart of what I do. So if I do that, if that gets my most attention, then, you know, once I've got that done, there's all this other stuff I can build around it. And then as time went on, we were able to do more, and I was able to have people that helped and all that. But I always sort of knew, you know, I kind of knew what was the most important thing, which, and it still is, like when all else fails, right, I'm focused on a good podcast, you know, the best podcast episode I can do each week. Maybe, you know, whether it's good or not, I'll leave that to other people, but I do the best I can each week with it.
And do you have like a way every morning? Like, what is your routine? Like, do you decide what's the top 5 things to do for the day or
Um,
for the week?
what I usually do is, I do better at this sometimes and less good at this sometimes with planning, but I tend to have gotten pretty good at anything that needs done ends up going on a task list, and I've got it sorted different ways. I've kind of got my method for doing it. So the big thing that I do now is everything always goes on there. I've gotten really good at, like, if I think of something, I immediately make sure it gets on there because I know I won't remember it. And then most mornings I'll start out and I just get out a piece of paper, and it's kind of low tech, but I list like every 30 minutes, 7 to 7:30, 8, 7:30 to 8, 8 to 8, and like that. And then I look at my calendar and I fill in everything that's kind of spoken for, like this podcast episode with you or coaching interviews. And then I look at like what space is left. So now I can kind of see, oh, I've got 4 30-minute periods, or I've got 2 hours this afternoon. And then now I go back to the to-do list and I go, all right, what can I plug into those spots? And it doesn't always go that way, right? Your plans always end up changing, but that's kind of the approach I take. And then, there's just the thing about a weekly podcast that comes out on Tuesday is we have a routine that's built in now. This happens then. Like every week, the certain things happen on certain days, and we just know what those are. So I generally do pretty well with that, but not, I'm certainly not perfect. I think that's where a lot of us fall down, is with planning.
Oh
So
yeah, that's helpful. That's super helpful. I mean, like all your tips so far have been super helpful about like small commitments, keeping your word to yourself, doing small behavior changes, like one message you want to send to yourself on spirituality, 3 minutes trying meditation, 15 minutes trying exercise. And your story is so impressive. Thank you for sharing that with me. Do you have any other tips you want to add?
I mean, I think we've kind of covered it. I guess I would just go back to sort of what I said, which is, the message. A lot of people say on, podcasts, like, is there anything you want to leave listeners with? And so tends to be what I usually do, which is sort of what I said earlier, which is I think wherever you are, whatever your circumstance, whatever you're going through, there is a way to move forward in the direction of what matters to you and what you want to do. That direction may be a lot smaller than you wish it was or want it to be, but there is a way to make forward progress. And I think all of us would be amazed what a series of small steps taken over and over and over will accomplish. It really, it's transformative if little activities done over and over and over again lead to huge results.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. And I love the one you feed. I love that whole concept. When I was younger, I remember there was like a Flintstone character where there was like a good one and a bad one on your shoulder, like Kazoo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of that. And where can people find you?
Yeah, you go to oneyoufeed.net, oneyoufeed.net. You can hear the podcast. You can find out about the coaching program. All our social media stuff's there. Anything you want to know about us is there.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And I will be checking this out more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
This episode is brought to you by Good Pod. Protein shakes are messy, expensive, and hard to make. Good Pod is a new amazing shake maker that's a blender and a pod in one. Take a pod, fill your glass with water or milk in 60 seconds or less. You have a healthy protein shake and it's ready to drink. Just like that.